The roommate I never saw a fresh start. When I moved into my new apartment, I thought it was the beginning of something great. I had just graduated college and landed my first real job. The apartment was a tiny one-bedroom unit in an old building downtown, but it was affordable, which was rare in the city. The landlord told me it had been vacant for a while. I didn't think much of it. I should have, because from the moment I moved in, something felt off. It was subtle at first. The way the air felt heavy at night. The way I always felt like someone was watching me, even when I was alone. And then the little things started happening. Things I couldn't explain. The first signs. One night, after a long shift at work, I came home exhausted. I threw my keys on the kitchen counter, dropped my bag on the couch, and went straight to my bedroom to change. When I came back, my keys were gone. I checked the counter. Nothing. I checked my bag, my pockets, even the floor. Still nothing. Frustrated, I turned to grab my phone to use the flashlight. And there they were, sitting perfectly centered on the coffee table. I froze. I knew I hadn't put them there. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. The door that locked itself. A few nights later, something even stranger happened. I had a habit of leaving my bedroom door open when I slept. I liked to be able to see down the hallway. It made the small apartment feel bigger. That night, I woke up gasping for air. I had no idea why, but something felt wrong. That's when I noticed my bedroom door was closed. I never closed it. My heart started pounding. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, and then I heard it. A soft, slow shuffling sound, coming from the other side of the door. My entire body went cold. I sat up, barely breathing, listening. The sound stopped. I stared at the door for what felt like forever before I finally got up, forcing myself to check. My hands were shaking as I reached for the handle and turned it, locked, from the outside. That's when I panicked. I started twisting the knob, yanking at the door, my pulse racing. Then, just as suddenly as it had locked, it clicked open. The hallway was empty. I was alone. But I didn't feel alone, and that's when I started to suspect. I wasn't living here by myself. The roommate I never saw. From that night on, things only got worse. Lights would flicker. Cabinets would be open when I knew I had closed them. I'd hear soft footsteps in the kitchen when I was lying in bed, only to find nothing when I checked. And then I started waking up to the sound of breathing. Not my own, someone else's, right next to me. But every time I turned on the light, there was no one there. The extra toothbrush. One morning, after another restless night, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. I reached for my toothbrush and froze, because there were two. Sitting in the cup, side by side. I only owned one. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? Did someone break in? Or was there something else, something living here with me that I had never seen? I grabbed the toothbrush and threw it in the trash. I told myself it was nothing, but I knew. And then that night, I woke up to the sound of brushing, soft, rhythmic strokes, coming from the bathroom. I didn't get up. I didn't move, because deep down I knew what I'd see if I did. The toothbrush, no longer in the trash, being used by someone I couldn't see. The closet incident. One night, I finally broke. I had just gotten home from work when I heard a noise from my bedroom. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight. I stepped inside. The room was still, except for one thing. The closet door was open, just an inch. I always kept it shut. I stood there staring, my pulse hammering, and then the door moved. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, like someone was inside, watching me. I ran. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, not stopping until I was outside, my chest heaving. I didn't go back that night, or the next. The landlord's confession. The next day, I called my landlord and told him I was breaking the lease. I didn't even give him a reason, just said I was moving out immediately. To my surprise, he didn't argue. He just sighed. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because we both knew what he meant. That apartment had never been empty. Not really. And I had never been alone, not for a single night. The lake that takes a soul every year. The local legend. There's a lake hidden deep within the woods of Black Hollow, a quiet, forgotten town where nothing much happens, except for one night every year. On that night, without fail, someone disappears. No body is ever found, no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, just gone. The townspeople call it the taking. It happens every year on the same date, November 13th, and no matter how hard people try to avoid it, the lake always gets its soul. I didn't believe it until I saw it happen with my own eyes. A dare that went too far. I grew up in Black Hollow, and like most kids, I thought the legend was just a story meant to scare us from going near the water at night. But when I was 17, my friends and I did something stupid. We dared each other to go to the lake on November 13th. Just to prove it's all bullshit, my friend Kyle had said. We all laughed, but there was unease in the air. No one in town ever went near the lake after sunset, especially not on that night. But we were teenagers, and teenagers think they're invincible. So that night, armed with flashlights and a cooler of beer, we made our way into the woods. The first sign. The lake was beautiful at night, too beautiful. The water was unnaturally still, like glass. No ripples, no wind. And that's when we noticed the silence. Not a single cricket, not a rustle of leaves. Just dead air. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Kyle laughed. See? Just a normal lake. No ghosts, no demons, just a bunch of scared little kids. We all chuckled, nervously. Then, someone whispered, "Where's Dylan?" Vanished without a sound. We turned. Dylan, who had been standing right next to us, was gone. At first, we thought he was playing a prank. "Dylan, stop screwing around!" Kyle shouted. No response. We split up, searching with our flashlights, but he had vanished. No sound, no splash, just gone. I felt something cold creep down my spine. Then, from the middle of the lake, a bubble surfaced. Then another. And then, we heard a whisper. A voice, low and distant, carried across the water. "He's mine now." The curse of the lake, we ran. I don't remember how we got out of the woods, only that we didn't stop until we reached Kyle's house. We were breathless, shaking. Dylan was never found. The police searched for weeks, dragging the lake, combing the forest. Nothing. The town knew. No one said it out loud, but we all knew. The lake had taken its soul for the year, and it wouldn't take another, not until next November. The yearly sacrifice. I moved away after high school, trying to escape the memories. But every year, like clockwork, I checked the news on November 13th. And every year, someone disappeared. A hiker, a fisherman, a lost traveler. Always one. Never more, never less. Like the lake was feeding, waiting. And then one year, I got a call from my mother. "It's Kyle," she said. "He's missing." Going back, I hadn't stepped foot in Black Hollow in nearly a decade. But when I heard about Kyle, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I had to face the lake. And if I could, I had to stop it. I arrived on the morning of November 14th. Kyle had disappeared the night before. His parents were devastated, but the police were already giving up. Because they knew. No one who disappeared on November 13th ever came back. Breaking the cycle that night, I did what no one had dared before. I went back. Alone. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I stepped onto the shore. The lake was as still as ever. I whispered his name. "Kyle?" Nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped into the water. It was ice cold. Deeper, deeper. Then, a hand shot up from beneath the surface. I screamed. Kyle's face emerged from the water, his eyes wide, filled with terror. But when I reached for him, he was yanked back under. The choice. And then the voice came again. "A life for a life." The water rippled, and suddenly I understood. The lake didn't just take. It traded. One soul for another. It had Kyle, but it would take me instead. If I wanted to save him, I had to offer myself. The final moment, I looked at the water, at the thing beneath it, at the hungry ancient force that had been taking souls for generations. And I knew there was no stopping it. But I could make a choice. Him or me. And I made it. I stepped forward and let myself sink. Epilogue. The next morning, Kyle was found washed up on the shore, dazed, alive. I, however, was never seen again. And next year on November 13th, the lake will take someone else. Because no matter what we do, the lake always gets what it wants. My childhood home wasn't really my home. A house full of secrets. I used to think my childhood home was ordinary. A modest two-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Nothing remarkable about it, at least not at first. But looking back now, I realized there were always signs. The strange noises at night, the locked room no one ever talked about, the way my parents never wanted to discuss the house's history. I grew up thinking it was just an old house with quirks. I was wrong. It wasn't really my home, and I was never meant to be there. The room we weren't allowed in. One of my earliest memories is of me standing in front of the locked door at the end of the hallway. I was maybe 5 years old, tiny fingers tracing the chipped paint on the doorknob. I had never seen inside. No one had. Or at least, no one talked about it. "That room is off limits," my mom would say, her voice sharp and final. Whenever I asked why, my parents would change the subject. Even as a child, I knew they were hiding something, but I had no idea how deep the secret went. The first night I heard it, I was 8 the first time I heard the knocking. It came from inside the locked room. 3 slow knocks. I remember sitting up in bed, my heart pounding. I called out for my parents, but by the time they came rushing in, the house was silent again. "You were dreaming," my dad said, ruffling my hair. "Go back to sleep." But I wasn't dreaming. Because the next night, it happened again, and then again. And then, one night, I knocked back. Something knocked back. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the deep, gnawing feeling that something was in there. I crept down the hallway, the wooden floors cold under my feet. I placed my small hand against the door and knocked once. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, knock, knock, knock. I ran. The house that wasn't ours. Years passed, and I tried to forget. But strange things kept happening. Whispered voices in empty rooms. Furniture moved overnight, the smell of rotting wood that came and went without explanation. And then one day, when I was 16, I found something. An old newspaper clipping, tucked away in a forgotten drawer. The headline made my blood run cold. "Family vanishes without a trace in mysterious home disappearance." The picture beneath it? My house. The family before us. The article was dated 20 years before we moved in. A family of 3 had lived there. A mother, a father, and a young boy. One night, the parents were found dead in their beds. The boy? Gone, vanished, no body, no clues, just gone. And the most disturbing part? Police said the only sign of forced entry was a single open door, the same locked room in our hallway. The door finally opens. I confronted my parents. They denied everything at first. But then, my father sighed, rubbing his temples. "We didn't tell you because we didn't want you to be afraid," he said. The room, it was his. "Whose?" I whispered. My mother's voice was barely audible. "The boy who disappeared." A chill ran through me. They had been keeping his room locked all these years. But why? That night, I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to open it. What was inside? The key was hidden in my dad's office. With shaking hands, I turned it in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a perfectly preserved bedroom, like it had been frozen in time. The bed neatly made, toys scattered on the floor, a dusty baseball glove sitting on the desk, and on the wall, a photo of a boy. His eyes seemed to follow me. And then I noticed something else. In the corner of the room, a small figure standing in the shadows, watching me. He never left. I couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward, a boy, no older than 10. His clothes old-fashioned, his skin gray and lifeless, and his eyes hollow, empty. I wanted to run, but then he spoke. "This was my home. I was frozen, but you took it." The lights flickered, the walls shook, and suddenly I was falling, trapped. When I woke up, I was somewhere else. Same house, same room, but everything was different. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. The world outside the window was dark, shifting like a storm trapped in glass. And then I saw them, the shadows standing in the corners, watching, waiting. And then I heard the knocking, not from the door this time, but from inside the walls. I screamed. I pounded on the door. I tried to get out, but I couldn't, because I finally understood. This house was never really mine. It was his, and now I was the one who didn't belong.